What does the Delos Corporation want from Westworld? What's their grand plan? And what does it mean for Season 2? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. This video is brought to you with the support of my amazing Patreon community. Please do check out the link to my Patreon page if you're interested in joining up for some exclusive audio content. And do consider subscribing here if you enjoyed the video. Throughout Season 1 of Westworld, there are repeated hints that the company that owns Westworld isn't only interested in running a theme park. Instead, they have other plans that the wider world and the guests, and seemingly most of the employees of the company, simply do not know about. And whatever these plans are, they seem to be big. Lee Sizemore, who isn't entirely in on the scheme but has heard rumours, says that he knows that the board's plans go way beyond allowing rich people to play at being cowboys. Charlotte Hale later says that this place, the people who work here, are nothing compared to Delos's plans. And Ford, who doesn't seem to be a part of it but, let's face it, seems to know everything that's going on, says to Teresa that it was you people, Delos, who wanted to play God with your little undertaking. So there's something going on here behind the scenes that's being referred to as our little research project, that's actually massive. A plan that's much bigger than what we've been shown so far on the show. We'll come to exactly what this plan might be in a moment, because it's worth seeing how this has played out so far and quite how much it has influenced the action. Delos's plan seems to revolve around access to data that has been gathered in the park over many years, but they seem to be faced with the problem that Ford is actively trying to stop them getting access to this data at every turn. This is again something we need to come back to because it is important. Ford is opposed to Delos's plans and is trying to stop them. But for most of Season 1 we see this bizarre dynamic between Ford and Delos play out. Delos own the data from Westworld. They own all of Westworld, but Ford is in such complete control of everything to do with the day-to-day running of the park that it is impossible to roll out any plan without his agreement. So they humour him and let him do his own thing and try to do things behind his back when he's not paying attention. And Ford tells Bernard that this dance has been continuing for years. That Teresa, as the board's representative and overseer of the day-to-day running of operations, is just the latest in a long line of interventions. But now Delos seems to have run out of patience, and they start to go to ridiculous lengths to get their own data out of the park. First of all, Teresa comes up with a plan to get a host, the woodcutter, to head out into the wilderness with a whole load of data and a transmitter, so that it could be uploaded to a satellite. The woodcutter ends up getting trapped in a crevasse and the data doesn't get out. He appears to have been programmed to commit suicide by smashing his head in when he was captured, removing traces of the data smuggling attempt. Teresa then tries to get the body incinerated rather than put in cold storage, as would appear to be the norm, to cover up her tracks, but Elsie figures it out anyway. So by episode 3, we have already seen the extent to which Delos are trying to get around Ford to extract their data. At which point, Charlotte Hale arrives. It's important to realise that Charlotte Hale is not just a faceless representative of the company, she is the executive director of a multi-billion-dollar company, and she appears to be devoting 100% of her time to dealing personally with this issue. As we said before, this is the company's priority. As she herself said, our interest in this place is entirely in the intellectual property, the code. And if she, as executive director, is there to take personal control, things are getting serious. And she appears to have decided that rather than continue to try to go around Ford, she will just try to get rid of him. Which is why there was the slightly ham-fisted attempt to make it look like Clementine was glitching and endangering guests' lives. It was an attempt to make Ford look as if he was no longer in control, and to reduce his power base by getting Bernard sacked. Ford's response was simply to have Bernard murder Teresa and frame her directly for the attempted data smuggling. The message from Ford was clear: I am in complete control of what happens in the park. You aren't getting your data out, and I will go to any lengths to stand in your way. So Charlotte goes for the nuclear option to get the board to vote for his removal. At which point, of course, she came up against another problem, that the majority shareholder and board member, William, or the Man in Black, has gone missing deep in Westworld after the death of his wife. So Charlotte, again doing this herself, tracks him down and secures his vote for Ford's removal. Their conversation, though brief, is revealing. She says that Teresa died while trying to get out our information, and he doesn't ask which information that is. So he not only knows about this secret project, but, as he has been on the board all this time, presumably either supported it or perhaps even came up with the idea in the first place. So Charlotte confronts Ford with the fact that the board have agreed to retire him, and commissions Lee Sizemore to download the data they want into Peter Abernathy's head and smuggle him out of Westworld. This is a contingency plan at this stage. Charlotte thinks she has won. She hadn't, as we saw in the season finale, but at this stage she thought she had, and she just wanted to make sure that Ford didn't try to destroy the data as he left. So that's what's been going on, but the biggest questions still remain. What actually is this data? And what on earth could Delos' grand plan be? Let's start with the data. And there is a lot of data. First, there is the data on the hosts. Ford has kept a tight grip on the detail of how they operate, and crucially, how to control them. The technicians may know how to build hosts, but only Ford truly understands the subtleties of their coding. Witness how easy it is for him to code Maeve to do all that she does without anyone realizing. And this coding is probably what we are supposed to think of as the intellectual property of Westworld. And it's not hard to imagine what Delos might want to do with this intellectual property. We saw a hint of it in the Season 2 trailer. We see Bernard discover this host, who is apparently called a drone host. Imagine a whole army of drone hosts, super soldiers who can just be reprogrammed and rebuilt after every battle. They would be unstoppable. There's nothing to say that hosts need to look like cowboys or saloon bar workers. Their coding could be uploaded into any shaped soldier or anything. Imagine self-driving tanks with the ability to think and improvise, or fighter planes, or... well, the possibilities are mind-boggling. So, is this Delos' game? Well, I think it's part of it, and I think we'll see that played out during Season 2 as Bernard discovers more of what's been going on behind the scenes in Delos. But I think there's even more here, because Delos also control a huge amount of data on the guests. If you read the terms and conditions that guests have to sign, you can see that they are effectively giving up their rights to their DNA, and even any ideas that they may have while on Delos property. And of course, there are the many days of observed data about how each guest speaks and reacts to things, and what they enjoy doing when free from the constraints of normal society, and so on. And with all this information collected from wealthy and influential people, because those are the only people who would be able to afford $40,000 a day for a holiday in Westworld, they would have all they needed for a blackmail plot on an industrial scale. But I think even this is too small. Remember, Ford accused them of playing God. Well, Charlotte talks about the most important piece of information being the code. We assume that this is the host's coding, but what if it's the guest's genetic code that Delos are so desperate to have? The sequel to the original Westworld movie, Future World, centres on a plotline eerily similar to this. In that, Delos collected the DNA of the guests entering the park and made host replacements for them, sending them out into the real world. We've already had a nod to this in the show. In the movie, in order to distinguish between the guests and their host clones, Delos referred to each guest as the original. This is, of course, the name of the pilot episode of the show. And we've already had at least one host built to replicate a real-life human. Bernard, who is a host clone of Arnold, Ford's old partner. Ford even trained him to adopt some of Arnold's mannerisms, like cleaning his glasses while he thinks. And perhaps coincidentally, but probably not, the first voice we hear in the original is Arnold's, although at the time we were made to think it was Bernard's, the clone host masquerading as the original. This may all sound far-fetched, but we know that Delos are collecting DNA from the guests. We know that they have the technology to make clone hosts of the guests that seem so human no one can tell the difference. And we know that they have a plan that even Robert Ford, the man who controls everything that happens in Westworld, including creating an entire new species, thinks of them as playing God. It simply has to be something this ambitious. And incidentally, if this is true, this makes us look at Ford in an entirely new way, because he has been spending most of the last few decades opposing this. It opens up the possibility that he didn't just let the hosts gain self-awareness out of some god complex of his own, or some benevolent care for them. Self-aware hosts scupper any plans for them to be used as military puppets, because a drone host that might change its mind and turn on its masters is not the kind of weapon that could be sold to any army. And hosts who gain self-awareness are not going to be simple puppets that can be sent out into the real world to do the bidding of Delos, taking over the levers of power for them. They will want to do their own thing, not what Delos tells them. So, far from being an amoral figure with a god complex controlling Westworld for his own designs, perhaps Ford was actually trying desperately to prevent a corrupt and sinister organization from literally taking over the world. Perhaps his sacrifice at the end of Season 1 was less about his own plans and more about him taking the opportunity to kill as many Delos board members as possible while he had them in one place, and scupper their long-term plans for world domination. What do you think Delos' plan is? Why do you think they were trying to smuggle data out of their own park? Let me know in the comments below. As I said, please do check out my Patreon page if you're interested in supporting me make more videos like this, or if you want to access some exclusive audio content. And don't forget to subscribe here if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.